I'm Afshin Rattansi. We're going underground on a day the British Prime Minister has decided to discuss sexual harassment with Jeremy Corbyn and other party leaders. Coming up on the show, does US Special Counsel Robert Mueller know who the president of Ukraine is, let alone whether Donald Trump is an agent of the Kremlin? We talk to a Trump transition team official. And the day after million mask marches all around the world, detoxing democracy with economist and chair of Australia's Open Knowledge Foundation, Nicholas Gruen. Plus, iFilm star. We speak to Dave Johns, the star of Ken Loach's Palme d'Or-winning film I, Daniel Blake, about his new stand-up, sanctioning cabinet ministers and being radicalised by Ken Loach. All this and more coming up on today's Going Underground. But first, while the world considers the breakup of Spain, today was supposed to be the day Northern Irish parties restored devolved government in the UK. Forget Catalonia for a moment and the Basques and Czech Upper Silesia and Northern Italy, let alone Wallonia and Flanders in Belgium, let alone Brittany in France. And let's leave Scotland to one side. We're talking about the actual breakup of the UK. No wonder British minority government leader Theresa May, who's only PM because of a party that has fought Irish independence, looks arguably horrified by events on the Iberian Peninsula.
I have spoken to Mariano Rajoy this morning, as I did earlier this week, and made clear that the United Kingdom's position is very clear. We believe that people should be abiding by the rule of law and uphold the Spanish Constitution.
Theresa May's coalition partners in London were literally at war with Irish men and women allied to Catalonian independence parties. So, ripples from Catalonia not only strike Westminster, but Dublin's Doyle. That's where the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, allied to Spain's ruling party in the EU, has decided to call out the Catalans for an illegal referendum.
So the referendum in Scotland occurred under the laws of the United Kingdom. The referendum in Quebec occurred under the laws of Canada. This was different in that the referendum did not happen within Spanish law, within the constitutional legal framework of Spain.
Except while neoliberal Dublin and London backs Madrid, the story of post-2008 crash autonomy seeking goes on, even if the EU-funded Euronews tries hard to make its audience understand why Italian autonomy has nothing to do with Catalonia.
Unlike the referendum in Catalonia, this vote is not about independence. It's state-approved and will not face violent opposition.
Nice how the EU-funded channel can tell us so definitively what will not happen. In fairness, it does at least cover the story of the possible breakup of the country which actually hosts the European Parliament.
Flanders in Belgium is one of the best examples. The Dutch-speaking nationalist parties which govern the prosperous northern region no longer want to pay for its poorer southern neighbour, French-speaking Wallonia.
The problem is, arguably, that when European elites were printing billions of euros to bail themselves out after the bankruptcy of Europe's banking system, they just didn't predict that the people of Europe would rise up against them. And arguably a similar rebellion occurred in the USA, leading to the rise of Donald Trump. Joining me now is Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, who has advised the president ahead of his victory against Hillary Clinton. Jan, thanks for coming back on. Let's go straight to actually a caveat. We don't know whether the president has tweeted and what changes have been happening to his cabinet. Robert Mueller's indictment of Paul Manafort contains a factual inaccuracy about who the president of Ukraine was. How did Donald Trump, how can he possibly have appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel for the Russia investigation?
Well, Trump didn't appoint him. It was actually Rob Rosenstein who selected him.
Yeah, but it was up to Donald Trump, the Department of Justice to accept him.
It was the Department of Justice that did it. Yeah, no, Trump didn't.
But technically, Trump could have said no.
Well, okay, technically he could have, and can you imagine what the liberal media would have done with that if he had objected to it after firing Comey and then Comey's best buddy going in there? No, it would have not gone over. He would have never done anything like that.
I mean, Robert Mueller, of course, famously for this country, when he was at the FBI, was supposed to investigate the Lockerbie, one of the worst so-called terrorist incidents on British soil. That got nowhere either. I'm just wondering, what do you think Trump officials thought when he was suggested as a special counsel?
Well, he's highly respected within the FBI and within the justice system. And so I thought that it was going to be someone that wasn't going to create a lot of controversy, but at the same time there was suspicions because he and Comey were so close together. And really what's come out with Comey's testimony is that Comey set it up so Mueller would be the one that would be picked.
I mean, that's quite an indictment of itself.
Well, it is, and then if you look at everyone that Mueller has picked, the lawyers, They all have donated to Hillary Clinton. They've all been supporters of Hillary Clinton. And what I think is really funny within all of this is it started out as an investigation on any collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. And so far, nothing has come out. What are we at, 12 months now? Longer?
Well, yeah, but we're hearing from sources emanating from the Mueller camp, as it were, that it may not be collusion on the political scale, it may be corruption.
Well, corruption in what way? I mean, really, let's look at this. What he found out was now Tony Podesta, his company, which I guess is Company B with Company A.
Tony Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chair.
Well, that was John Podesta, so it's John Podesta's brother, Tony.
Okay.
And John and Tony had their lobbying company, and evidently that the Podestas and Manafort's company had been doing all this consulting with the Ukraine.
We're not going to end up hearing that Donald Trump's people, as in Manafort, was involved in destroying Bernie Sanders as the Democratic candidate, are we? Because John Podesta famously, it was his emails that exposed that.
No, in fact, Donna Brazile, she has a book coming out, and what has just been announced is that the Clinton campaign from 2015, well before she got the nomination, the Clinton campaign made a deal with the DNC that they would help the DNC get out of debt, but the Clinton campaign needed to have complete say about the DNC. Communications, who was hiring, the analytics, everything that was going on.
You mentioned Brazil, of course, who is at CNN. If you flip between CNN, MSNBC, CBS, and NBC right now, it is routine to assume that Russia put Trump in the White House, it appears, implicitly. I mean, are they joking?
I wouldn't say they're joking. I would say they're very delusional. Look, something has happened that they can't accept that they're not in touch with their voters. And it's not to say that all the Republicans have been in touch with their voters either, because we're seeing how a lot of the elite establishment is really dropping down in approval ratings and are going to probably get challenged in their primaries. But I think what we really need to look at, possibly, is that they still can't accept that Hillary was such a horrible candidate, totally missed the key points, what the voters were interested in, and they absolutely messed up. And they refuse to change their position on things with the hope that they could take over seats in 2018. They are absolutely in denial. Hillary Clinton wrote her book, What Happened, and she went out and blamed everyone. And where did she take responsibility? That is denial of what happened.
And meanwhile, Trump shut down the Russian consulate in San Francisco, has been, I mean, Britain follows on from whatever comes from the State Department, Rex Tillerson's State Department. I mean, how long do you think Moscow is going to cope with the fact that while all this goes on and people think that Trump is the Kremlin's man in the White House, Trump continues to cause arguably deteriorating relations with Moscow?
Well, let's just go back to the day that the DNC had their national convention. That was the day that WikiLeaks exposed a lot of the emails, the first day. And they immediately knew it was Russia. They blamed Russia. I don't know any other time in history when anyone who had been hacked, they knew exactly who did it that quickly. You know, it's been something to perpetuate, to justify why they lost. And they'd be far better off doing a really good analysis, because then maybe, you know, there are people out there that don't like Trump. Maybe they well could take over some Senate or some House seats.
Dr. Jan Arpahaise, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, in the next 48 hours, UK Brexit Secretary David Davis has his sixth round of EU negotiations amidst mainstream media reporting that Theresa May's minority government could actually fall. But according to our next guest, Brussels negotiations could look set to leave half of Britain's population resentful. Professor Nicholas Gruen is the CEO of Lateral Economics and former economic advisor to the Australian government. His talk, Detoxing Democracy, Brexit and the Considered Will of the British People, is on at King's College London tonight. Thank you so much for coming on, Nicholas. Just before we go to your talk, did it surprise you that we heard in the past few days that 85% of UK MPs were unaware that new money is created every time a loan is extended by a bank?
Yes, it's strange that people think that money is basically, you know, this sort of stuff that circulates. That's 3% of the money supply, and the rest of it is provided by banks.
Paper money is 3% of the whole...
Paper money is 3% of the money supply, and the rest of it is created by banks. Nice work if you can get it.
But 85% of our elected lawmakers don't even understand where money comes from.
Your central bank, the Bank of England, published a paper saying that banks create most of the money, 97% of the money that you use, in, I think, 2014. But the not many people have got the memo, I'm
But
afraid.
these are the people having to grapple with the issues surrounding the Western economic crisis.
Indeed, indeed. So this is decision making at 1,000 miles an hour before people have time to really think about the decisions they're making, and that's how we're making more and more decisions. So what I'm talking about tonight is slowing that process down and trying to narrow what is now a yawning gap between the opinion of the people and the considered opinion of the people.
OK, so tell me a bit more about the talk, because you say that it'd be wrong to just take the straight Marxist approach that it's material conditions that are affecting what is seen as the degradation of debate today.
So for instance, Australia, where I come from, had a much less bad global financial crisis than Britain. It hasn't had the...
It had one way before, in the 90s.
It had one of those, but it also hasn't had anything like the level of growing inequality that has happened in the UK, and yet support for major parties has fallen to about the same level as in England. Trust in institutions, and particularly in politics, has fallen to about the same level. So something more is going on than changing material conditions, and I think what's going on is that people feel the inauthenticity of their politics.
Although the trust in the two parties at the most recent election here in June has gone up, arguably.
That's because people felt that they were actually fighting for something, but they still feel themselves as... They understand how politics has morphed into brand management rather than a fight for ideas. They understand that every party, when it goes into opposition, simply says the same kinds of things against the government when it's trying to tighten the budget and so on, and that if roles were reversed, they would be saying the opposite of what they are saying. That's now so part of politics in Australia and Britain that people feel that it's tremendous inauthenticity. OK,
Jeremy Corbyn arguably an outlier, but you have a proposed solution here based on Athens.
I do. So remember that...
Not Athens after the crash.
No, not modern Athens, but ancient Athens. So here's a proposition for you. We think of democracy as elections. We think of those two things as the same. The point of elections is to get a small group of people to represent the others, so that the small group of people can do the work of thinking about the issues and working out what to do. Well, in Athens, they had a different way of doing that, and the way they did that was to choose ordinary people at random from the community, get them together and get them to deliberate on issues and problems.
Like jury service.
Like jury service, as we still do, as is enshrined 800 years ago in Magna Carta. So here is an institution which is as well regarded today as it was 100 years ago. That's not true of normal politics. Why? Because juries try and solve problems. Juries don't work by somebody trying to take advantage of somebody else in a jury. They work in a unitary way, not in a competitive way, to try and work out what the best compromise is. And if we can inject more of that into our politics, we can firstly not make huge mistakes, which I think Brexit is, but secondly, we can turn politics into a problem-solving kind of enterprise rather than a problem-creating enterprise.
You don't think this cross-section of public opinion, though, will give rise to more Donald Trumps, more Brexits, and
Absolutely
so on?
Not. Absolutely not. When you get people together...
I mean, not that they're necessarily a bad thing. They're obviously been democratically voted for.
Well, I think those things are a creature of the will of the people, not the considered will of the people. In Australia, our parliament, we had a carbon pricing system, a carbon tax, if you like. It took about 10 years of hard political work to bring it about, and we abolished it. Why did we abolish it? Because it worked for the politics. It worked for the opposition of the time to promise to abolish it. They got in and abolished it, and I'd say 80 or 90% of parliamentarians knew that it was the wrong thing to do, but the dynamics of the politics was for the opposition to promise to get rid of something that the government had done.
Professor Nicholas Gruen, thank you.
Thanks very much.
After the break. From doing stand-up on stage to addressing the Labour conference with trade union boss Len McCluskey, we speak to Dave Johns about the true stories of food banks, benefit sanctions and austerity behind Ken Loach's Palme d'Or winning film, I, Daniel Blake. All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground. Welcome back. In the next 24 hours, the UK NGO Trussell Trust will release new figures revealing a surge in the use of food banks by those left destitute in the wake of the Western economic crisis. Joining me now is the star of Ken Loach's Palme d'Or-winning film, I, Daniel Blake, which portrays the effect of policies pursued by Theresa May, which are designed to punish the poor who are allegedly work-shy. Dave John's new show, I, Film Star, is on in London's Soho Theatre from tomorrow. Dave, welcome to Going Underground. So you're a Palme d'Or-winning film star, and your new comedy stand-up routine, I Film. Just tell us about your route to stardom in Hollywood.
Yeah. Basically, the show is about the craziness that happened to me after we did I, Daniel Blake. Basically, I was a stand-up comic. I've been a stand-up comic for about 30 years on a circuit, you know. It had some little bits of success, but it was, it was sort of plateauing out. And then I got a text from a friend of mine who said Ken Loach was looking for a guy my age.
Arguably one of Britain's greatest film directors.
Yeah, he was casting for his new film, and I sent a text to the casting director, and if you jump to when the film won the BAFTA, after 2 years later, the casting director said, I've still got the text that you sent us. And she said, do you want to have a look at it? And I went, all right. And this is probably the one text that's absolutely changed my life. And it basically, I read it and it said, hi, my name's Dave Johns. I'm a 59-year-old stand-up comic. Yeah, Ken Loach is looking for a bloke my age to be in his new film. I'd be up for that. And basically, when Ken saw it, he said, we're going to get him in. So that text, I went in, I did some castings, I did some auditions, I did 3 auditions and different improvisations with different actresses, and I got the part, and since then, I've got myself a film career at the age of 62. It's insane.
And quite apart from Ken Loach, Ken's been on this show, but he never told us, he might have mentioned the audition process. One of the first things he told you to do was to fill out an employment and support allowance welfare form.
Yeah, the first week when we got there for before we started filming, I was up in Newcastle for a week when I had to go and learn how to wood carve the little fish that my character does, that Dan does.
In I, Daniel Blake.
Yeah, and the first thing he said to me, here's a bit of homework for you, fill in the 52-page assessment form. and I come back and I can't do this, it's insane, this, Ken. And I think what he was trying to say is, you're quite a bright bloke, you're quite, you don't have any pressures on you, and he has people who are disabled and who are having to fill in these forms and filling it in wrong and not getting the right points could lose the benefits, and that pressure, and that was just to give me an insight, because when I started the film, I didn't know anything about sanctions, I didn't know...
Welfare sanctions.
Yeah.
After 2008.
All that, yeah. So basically, we started filming in Newcastle, in Byker, in a suburb of Newcastle, where I was brought up as a kid.
So you were brought up in the area where the film was set?
Yeah. And when we did the film, it was all around the places where my mum used to take us when I was a kid and that. And, we made the film in 2015 in October, November time. It was about 7 weeks shoot. And, I never thought that it would have the impact it did have, you know what I mean? I think it's helped to change the narrative in the country that, that people who needed benefits were somehow, scroungers in not wanting to work. And then it showed the light that these are just ordinary people, Dan could be your dad, he could be your uncle, Katie could be your sister. So suddenly people thought, oh my God, that could be my dad, you know what I mean? And it brought home the failure of the benefit system, really. It's not working,
OK, it arguably changed the narrative, but one Tory MP at least, Kwasi Kwarteng, who's been on this show, he's now been promoted to become a PPS at the Treasury, actually. He was very quick, like other Tories were, to fight a sort of rearguard action against you in that film.
Well, of course they would. They are the ones that are implementing the system. And so, of course they're going to say, oh, it's an exaggeration. But, we know the people who are watching it, the people who live that every day know it's not an exaggeration. I mean, the food bank scene, people say, is one of the most moving scenes I've seen in a film, and that was in a real food bank, and that story came from a true story that Paul Lafferty had, the writer had heard about from a food bank.
This is the scene where the character called Katie, who starts weeping over
hunger.
getting...
It's basically about hunger, and it's people who are pushed to basically to the brink of being so hungry that these food banks have had to spring up everywhere, and it's about the community coming together when the government should be doing this and I think.
But should they? We were up in Manchester for the Conservative Party conference, and the former vice chair told us we should be celebrating increased food bank use as proof of the David Cameron concept of a big society. Food banks are good.
When I was a kid or a teenager, it was Social Security. It was a safety net there. That when you became in hard times, there was some safety net that would help you. Now it's become, to me, it's like getting people to make it so hard for people that they give up. And what you've got is, if people can't feed themselves, then of course people are going to, you know, things like churches and local community centres are going to go, we need to help. So you've got people collecting food, but that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't have food banks. So this country is wealthy. It's one of the 5th most wealthiest countries in the world. To have food banks, to me, is a national disgrace, really, rather than, even though it's a great thing to have because it's the community coming together, but it shouldn't, there should be no necessity for it, I feel.
You grew up in that community where I, Daniel Blake, was short. How successful have these years of Blairite Labour, arguably, and Conservative governments been in breaking apart these community ties, whether it be trade unions, church groups, or...
Well, when I was in Byker, where the film was set, I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, it was a working class area. It was a tight-knit working class area. There was working class people. We lived, until I was about 7 or 8, we lived in 2 rooms in a place called Shipley Street, which was a very working class area. And, you know, but I never felt deprived because there was that there was a community there and there was work, you know? And what happened was, if somebody was unemployed, they would get the dole, they would go down, they would get the dole paid in cash, and that was there to help them until they got more work. Now it seems with 0 hours contracts, and they've made going for Social Security a dirty word. That's why they call it benefits. That's why they call it welfare, because it gives that feel that, oh, it's something for nothing. And so I think when I was a young kid, there was plenty of work, and the communities now have all been decimated, you know? Like there's no social housing, and people are put into private landlords, and so people are scattered. There's no real community, and people are trying to bring the community together, but you know, it's overwhelming odds. You know, they seem to be swimming up a torrent of water coming towards them and trying to make their way up. But every time where the government should be there, Social Security should be there should be a safety net there. It seems to me it's always about trying to make it so hard that you just give up. And I think that's the idea. It's to give up and take any job you want, even if it's low paid, just so that the government doesn't have to look after people. And I think as a human being, as a society, you know, that diminishes us if we can't all be great strivers. And I think we should have a community where, a society where we help people who are struggling and help them to get on their feet, you know?
I want to get on to the humour of this show. That sounded
there is some jokes, but
there are going to be jokes. Before we go to the jokes, I just got to say, obviously, and maybe you'll see this as a tragic joke, you know, the other side is we have to hit all of those communities, break them apart into pieces to pay off these losses, because the banks did fail, and this is what we have to do to manage the books.
But I think people are angry that there's always money to be found when it needs to be found for things like bailing out the banks, but when it's to help, you know, if it's to, you know, the National Health Service, I mean, or anything like that, then it's always, oh no, there's no money left for that. And that's what makes people angry. And what I'm really excited about is that the young people are getting engaged in politics now. I was asked to go down and talk at the Labour Party conference after the film came out, and I'd never done that before. And I went down and I was so excited by how vibrant it was that the young people are getting engaged. They're suddenly saying, you know, there's a better way to live than this. We don't have to always just, you know, try and sort of like, you know, squeeze every drop, every penny out of it and don't care about others. You know, it's about us all in it together. And that's, you know, Cameron's The Big Society. It was just a slogan. I think now people are feeling, no, we really need to change this. You know, we really need to make a change, because it's just people are being left, and that's why we're getting loads of trouble, because people are getting angry and they're getting, and there doesn't seem to be any way out for them. And I think that's the case, because I don't know anybody for an easy life would want to take their kids and a family to a food bank on a Friday to get food. But the necessity, I mean, the thought of having to go there and do that, and that's why the people who work in those places are amazing. They don't call it a handout. They say, come and do your shopping, you know? And it's about giving people dignity, you know? That's what it's about, really.
And, I mean, the stand-up comedy was big in the 1980s during the miners' strikes and so on, but arguably the leader of the Labour Party supports the kind of comedy, presumably, and some of the issues being touched by comedians. What is your act really about here?
Well, basically, my show is about basically what happened to me after the film. I mean, like I say, I was a stand-up comic, and basically after the film came out and it won all the awards, I've been offered other films, and so I thought I've got to, because it was such a weird, like going to Cannes and, you know, the BAFTAs.
And Meryl Streep nearly tripped over you.
No, I had a, it was at the BAFTAs. You know, you get to parties afterwards, and like, you know, most working class people, you know, I got the champagne and I was at the bar, and for some reason when I saw Meryl Streep, and for some reason I screamed out, "Meryl, it's all free!" and she was like, "Oh, I'll put my purse away then." And, you know, so those sort of things where I'm interacting with all these amazing...
What did she say?
She just laughed.
Did she have a...
She probably thought I was a nutcase, you know what I mean? If I ever come up and it says, "Oh, Meryl, we've got this guy who wants you to be in the film with,"
You'll be in her diary.
What, him? But you know, it's all about the craziness that happened after the BAFTAs, and you know, in meeting Steven Spielberg, and you know, just all the crazy...
Steven Spielberg watch I, Daniel Blake? Is he going to refilm it in space?
I don't know if you saw Daniel Blake, but basically he was there doing the BFG, you know? And so it was all that. So the stories are about how I found myself making films, you know, and how from being a stand-up comic on the circuit to, you know, hanging around, like, you know, meeting Amy Adams and Emma Stone from La La Land and all that. And I'm friends with Isabelle Huppert.
But, you know, I mean, it's interesting. We were talking about benefits and welfare, or as you say, social security. There was an emergency debate about universal credit. David Gauke, the DWP Secretary for Work and Pensions, didn't turn up. Knowing what you do from all the work you did on that film and everything, do you think his pay should be docked for not turning up to the emergency debate?
I think that just shows where their priorities are, really, isn't it?
Should he be sanctioned?
I mean,
should politicians be sanctioned?
I think it would be a good idea to sanction politicians. I think they would find out where it is. You know, you know, people always say they push this mantra that basically it's all about getting you back to work. You know, the 6 weeks wait for the money. You know, it's about getting you back to work and getting used to. Well, you know, when you get a job, you have to wait 6 weeks for your pay, and it's all about, you know, it's always pushed as though
personal responsibility, carrot and stick. Sure.
Yeah, and they fail to see that this is lives that they're talking about here, and for him not to turn up for a debate and for a vote is a disgrace, really. I mean, like you know, have the courage of your convictions and stand up there and be counted. You know what I mean?
Dave Johns, thank you. That's it for the show. We'll see you on Wednesday, the day the UN's Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, holds its conference in Paris, this time without the USA after Donald Trump's withdrawal from the organization. Till then, keep in touch via social media. We'll see you on Wednesday, 13 years to the day. 10,000 US soldiers besieged the Iraqi city of Fallujah, firing cluster bombs and white phosphorus on men, women and children. A 2010 report suggested that the toxic legacy of Fallujah was worse than the US nuclear bombing of Hiroshima.